What's good, everybody? My guest today is Meshach Amuah-Fuster, who has been the CEO for companies such as Aurea Software and Coppertree, the managing director for Allbound, and the director of sales for Vimeo. I want to get into his career projection and trajectory, I should say, in a moment. But he's seen it all, frankly, from seed stage to IPO with a core vision of stabilization, growth, and profitability. And I definitely wanted to get into that growth and profitability today with you, Meshach. Meshach, welcome to the Goats of Growth.
Great. Thanks for having me, Jay. Appreciate it.
How did I do pronouncing your last name, by the way?
Amuah-Fuster. However, it takes various deviations. But yeah, Amuah-Fuster. Amuah's Ghanaian and
Um,
Fuster is, I think, Swiss, which I think makes me Australian or something. I don't know. So, so yeah, kind of all over the place. So yeah.
I was listening to a couple of other podcasts that you've done, and I was trying to pick it up and trying to nail it. So
Sure.
I tried to do the best I could, but
No,
which is why I asked.
you're
So
absolutely fine. I've heard worse. So you're good. You're good.
well, thank you for your grace. So let's just start with one of the things I just mentioned, which is we didn't get into it much when we did our pre-interview, so to speak, our conversation, but just your career trajectory, because I think candidly, I don't meet a lot of people who have really started from the bottom, frankly, and made it all the way to the top, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like there are, I mean, I guess everybody by definition starts from the bottom, but I feel like you had a nice linear trajectory there and progression. So talk to me about that and some of the learnings along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, economics degree, fresh out of university, uh, many moons ago. And as I was looking for a job, I always found myself gravitating towards roles which were commission based, based on my ability to provide quality and quantity. Um, I wanted to be able to stand out. I did sport at school, at university as well. I've always been relatively competitive. And so the desire to have a role where your earnings were reflective of your effort was kind of just key for me. And so I ended up working in an organization that provides audio visual telephone conferencing, right, which has manifested itself into UCAS, but also what we're doing today, which is having a conversation in different parts of the globe, right? So my first role was really what you would call today an SDR. It was called something different back then, but what you would call it today is an SDR. And my job was to pick up the phone, reach out to individuals who would be a good fit for our organization, a good ICP, and then book meetings for more accomplished salespeople. Did that for a while, realized that we were writing commission checks for individuals on meetings that I was booking, and the commission that I got was like 20 quid, £20 per meeting, which I thought was great at the time, and then realized actually these guys are making a lot of money. And that's when I was kind of on the hook, to be in sales. And so from there, I worked in sales for 9 years as an individual contributor. Then for another 5 years, moving into sales leadership. And then for the last 5 years in revenue and operations. I think that linear approach, you're absolutely right. I always kind of saw myself as a CRO over the last maybe 10 years. But I kind of pivoted to CEO simply because I think for two reasons. I think number one is I actually enjoy the operational side of things as well. I think that's quite interesting from a process standpoint. And I think number two, in more and more in today's market, the CEO role, obviously it's not a rule, but the CEO role has taken on more of a revenue inclined C-suite operative. Historically, maybe it was more product and engineering, or maybe a financially astute individual. Again, I'm kind of broadly speaking. I think today ownership is now looking for CEOs that can actually get their hands dirty and are not afraid to get their hands dirty, as opposed to just being a bridge between ownership and the entity. And I've kind of spent my career doing that. So yeah, that kind of linear fashion lends itself to that. And then finally, I've always just been curious about how to grow and how to evolve. I'm never stagnant, so I always want to kind of understand from people that are more intelligent than I and more accomplished than I. How did you do that? Talk to me about that. Just the desire to learn, I guess.
Let me ask you this: why do you think it's more critical now? Why do you think folks are looking at CEOs to be more revenue focus now as opposed to years before when it was more financially inclined and that type of thing?
That's a great question. I think there's two reasons. I think the first reason is because we live in a world now where every revenue, the top line and the bottom line are just so paramount. Like they're just so paramount, and that manifests itself in how businesses operate. Historically, you've seen businesses that would focus on just providing a great customer experience and reputation and branding and so forth. But we're now in times where inflation is through the roof, and gas and electric prices are through the roof, and everything is about profit and revenue, with a top line or bottom line. And so having a C-suite operative who can specifically articulate the go-to-market strategy to ownership in a way which is
Mm,
concise and comprehensive and understandable across
mm,
both sides of the coin is key. I think the other reason
mm,
is more practical terms. Someone who can be a kind of player coach type role at more layers of the business, right? Rather than just being a bridge for shareholders and between the shareholders and the entity. I think if you can have leaders who are willing to get their hands dirty, that plays a role in helping ownership um, be more agile. And you see that in smaller businesses. Smaller businesses have to take more risks, but they also have to be more lean. That's why they're called bootstrapped. And every dollar or penny or pound or yen has to be spent as effectively as possible. And I think that also kind of manifests itself in C-suite operatives being more hands-on.
that makes sense. You obviously made the leap from CRO to CEO. Kind of a two-part question, I guess, which is that how big of a leap was that for you, or maybe even is that more broadly? Do you think, in speaking with other people who have made that leap, and I guess the analogy I would use is, there's college and then there's the NBA, right? Or there's college and there's the NFL, right? And sometimes I've heard people say like Alabama is basically like an NFL team, and people say, well, the difference is that Alabama might have like 5 first round picks, whereas an NFL team has all 1st round picks, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's really a
yeah,
big difference. Um,
yeah.
how big of a leap was that? Number one. Number two, obviously, you're certainly strong on the revenue side. You mentioned that you had an interest in operational side as well in terms of the way that it worked, which is why you were even interested in becoming CEO. But I guess, so how big of a leap was it? And then where were the gaps for you? In other words, where did you need to fill the gaps, and how did you fill them to learn what you needed to do to be an effective CEO?
Yeah. So, in terms of the leap, it depends on the goals of ownership, right? So, some VCs will want you to come into an organization. They will have a 1 to 7 year plan. They'll have this growth target. They will have this year-on-year growth target (NRR). They'll look at key metrics such as your customer lifetime value, your CAC, the ratios, your NPS, your internal rate of returns, your compound annual growth, your NRR, whatever it might be, your GRR, and then they'll
Mm-hmm.
formulate a strategy based on historical data versus forecast. And if they have an aggressive revenue target, it probably makes more sense to bring in a CRO type mindset to the CEO position. Again, not always, but
Mm-hmm.
logic would have it that it would probably make sense. And so I've always been quite analytical. Like I studied economics at university, but had a statistics component to it as well, and financial accounts. And statistics really help from a revenue standpoint because you're looking at revenue frameworks which determine revenue success and growth success for the organization. Um, but also studying financial accounts, it helped me to understand the underlying factors from a bottom line perspective of what success looks like for, say, a PE, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the leap wasn't actually that difficult, mainly because I'd had finance. I can speak the language of finance. I already had an inherent interest in the operational side, even though it's probably more like 20% of my of my armory. And and the last piece is because I'm more of a growth minded operative, the organizations that I typically gravitate towards or ownership that I gravitate towards have that mindset in mind as well. So So the transition wasn't that difficult. What was your second question again? Sorry.
So the second question was really just about where your particular gap was, skill gap
Yeah.
was, and how did you fill it or go about making it stronger? You know.
Yeah. So initially, there was a small gap around the language of finance. I studied my economics degree, 20 years ago. And so it was really interesting because, like skiing or cycling, you kind of remember what you learned pretty quickly. It's really
Mm,
interesting how it stays in the back of your mind for decades. And so when I
mm,
picked up, books to understand balance sheets and P&Ls and cash flow analysis and income statements, but not just being able to read it, but also being able to decipher and understand and make actionable insights based off of those metrics and those results.
mm,
And okay, so for example, if you have a CLT, a customer lifetime value to CAC ratio of more than 4 to 1, you might want to invest more into the business, right? But if it's less than three
mm,
to one, you might want to withhold some of that investment and actually bring that to a level that's acceptable to ownership. It's about taking the
mm,
data and making insights based off what you see on a balance sheet or whatever it might be. So there's that side of it
mm,
as well. Um, so
mm.
that's a leap that I had to take, which I was quite comfortable with. The only thing that's inevitable is change, and if you don't adapt, then we all know what happens. So yeah, there was a few leaps that I had to take, but I think if you put your mind to anything, then there's no reason why you can't achieve most things. So
That 4 to 1 ratio that you just mentioned, lifetime value to CAC. You mentioned you may want to invest more, right,
mhm,
in marketing. Let's just say, right.
sure.
And I understand it's obviously different for every business and every scenario, but in the scenario that comes to mind there, tell me why that is. Why would it be necessary to invest, or better, I should say, to invest more in marketing in that particular case?
It's a great question. So there's data, and then there's insights, and then there's actions you take based on insights. Now, looking across different metrics, verticals, industries, obviously SaaS, for example, which is my specialty, will vary from other industries, for example. But if you have a high lifetime value, and what that really is just the amount of revenue you garner from a typical customer over a period of time, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
all it is. The customer acquisition cost is basically all of the costs from a COGS standpoint associated with acquiring per customer. So that's typically things like salaries, that's typically things like operating costs, that's typically things like marketing, and the technology you use to acquire said companies. Those are usually the kind of four main costs associated with CAC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you will find that is if the ratio is significantly high, like five and above, then there's room. You're leaving money on the table. There's room for your organization to generate more revenue because the lifetime significantly outweighs how much you pay to receive a new customer, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
can take the money you're receiving from existing and pump that into new business efforts, right? And if you don't know that, then you don't know that you're leaving money on the table, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then vice versa, if it's like 2 to 1 or even 3 to 2, then what that means is either the lifetime value of the customer isn't high enough, or the amount that you spend to acquire a new customer is too high. Okay, so in that regard, you need to figure out what you want to do there, which is usually pull back on spend. Okay. So these are the type of conversations that I find entities may or may not know when speaking with ownership, right? And there's a misalignment between both of those entities, rightly or wrongly. And I think there's definitely a gap in the market to educate based on that, based on those metrics. But that's an example of deriving value from a formula, for example.
Yep, that makes sense. You mentioned pull back on spend on that example where it's 2 to 1 or 3 to 2.
Mhm.
How do you make that decision? In other words, what if it's because where my mind went was, well, maybe you're not charging enough, or maybe there's not enough value that you're delivering for the customer. So how do you know? I mean, I'm sure it's somewhere in the data, but I guess where in the data do you look to make that decision? Like, bring me into the weeds there.
Yeah, it's a great question. So you can do a few things, right? The first thing I would do is there a possibility of acquiring customers at a more cost effective rate? The reason why that's so powerful is because A, you don't have to necessarily change your pricing, and B, cost has a bigger implication on the bottom line than revenue. So that's the first thing.
Yep.
The second thing, it has more of an impact on like EBITDA and net margin. The second thing
Mm-hmm.
is the other, which is to how can we how can we increase the value that our customers gain so that they can remain customers for longer? And that could be product led, which is back to the investment piece. It could be changing your pricing structure. Maybe you're not charging enough, right? Maybe you're charging too much. Maybe you're doing things like maybe you're only providing monthly contracts when you could be charging minimum 2 year contracts. I've seen that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're doing trials and you don't need to. Maybe your retention rate will increase if you don't do trials because they have
Mm-hmm.
more skin in the game, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
sounds counterintuitive, but I see it all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're not listening to customers. Maybe your NPS score is really low, and you don't actually know what your customers want, which is why customer feedback is key, right? What features do you
Mm-hmm.
want that you don't have? I've done that in the past where you do like a survey and you ask 4 questions. Here's what you have. Were you aware of what you have? Um, what features are your most favorite? What features do you hate? And what features would you like to see? And that is the foundation that we use from a product roadmap standpoint to develop new features that we then take to market. That's part of increasing the customer lifetime value over X number of quarters, right? But again, it's
Yeah.
identifying the problem and then it's putting in place a solution or a framework to fix a problem and then provide intangible ROI based on the addressable market, based on deals we've lost in the past, based on a retention play, a win back strategy, whatever it might be. And your job
Yep.
as a CEO, a CRO, a CMO is to be able to articulate that effectively to ownership and implement that while providing a vision to the business to execute accordingly. That makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
When you going back to the cost side, the CAC side for a moment, and you
Mhm.
talk about people, you talk about the technology, the marketing, and what was the other thing? People,
So
marketing, technology,
you've got
and
people's salaries. You've got things like
yep,
operating costs.
yep,
So let's say you rent a WeWork, for example. You've got sales and marketing, like advertising, your SEO,
yep,
your PPC, all that kind of stuff. And then you've got tools. So maybe you
yep.
use a CRM. Maybe you use an outreach tool, whatever it might be. Maybe you use LinkedIn or whatever it might be. So those are kind of the
Mm-hmm.
main 4 costs from a CAC standpoint.
Got it. So out of those four, is there one that universally, if you cut, you can reduce costs, but not necessarily impact growth or, I guess, effectiveness? You know what I mean? Like as far as like, what's the, I guess, what's the one out of those four, if there is one that you can cut where it's not necessarily going to hurt as badly, I guess, if you will, or have some sort of crazy ripple effect to the company?
Yeah, I'm gonna be annoying here and say it depends. Like, let's say there's like, oh, I don't know, a global pandemic, right? And let's say one of your
Okay.
biggest costs is bricks and mortar, or not necessarily bricks,
Right.
like because it depends on the type of the business you run. But if you now shift
Yeah.
to everyone works from home, all of a sudden you're saving significantly. But what if your business is, oh, I don't know, audio visual conferencing? Now, not only is your
Mm.
cost gone down, but your new business acquisition has gone through the roof, right? So in
Right.
that
Yeah.
instance, the O is perfect. But then on the flip
Mm.
side, let's say your business has a 90%, the 90% of the deals you win come from inbound versus outreach, right? Then you could
Mm.
maybe you could reduce spend on advertising, right? But
Mm.
let's say
Mm.
actually, so you might do it from that perspective, but it's about understanding in that scenario where your deals come from, right?
Mm.
If you are able to run processes internally, and we're seeing this with AI now, for example. So a good example is, let's say you run a customer care solution, right? And you have chatbots, and you have a UI sidekick, and you have a knowledge base scraper, right? You maybe be able to use AI, which is an obvious example use case, which we see all the time today, to provide those facilities as opposed to headcount, right? So then you might say, okay, we can
Mm.
reduce salaries in that regard while retaining and in some cases increasing output. So it just
Mm.
depends, and that's the decisions that CEOs have to make. They have to determine where can we where can we maximize the top line and maximize the bottom line simultaneously? These are the two strings you're pulling. That's ultimately what they're trying to achieve, and that's not an easy skill to do, right? But that's why they are put in the positions of that much responsibility.
So let me ask you this, another layer to that whole situation, which is decisiveness. In other words, you need to make let's say, for instance, it is a situation you mentioned, like the once in a lifetime pandemic, or maybe not in a maybe not a once in a lifetime, we'll see, but where you need to make decisions
Mm-hmm.
quickly, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I guess number one, how quickly should these decisions be made? And let's say, for instance, it's not even a pandemic; it's just sort of a traditional crisis situation,
Yeah.
whatever that might be. You're burning too much cash or whatever, right? How
Mm-hmm.
quickly couldn't these decisions be made? And well, yeah, let me just ask that: how do you quickly make those decisions?
So obviously, most businesses have like a quarterly call with ownership. Okay. And the goal of that call is to do, again, kind of four core things. The first thing is to explain what happened in the last quarter, in the last year, explain what's going to happen in the next quarter, in the next year. How close are you to executing what you promised you would execute in the last quarter? And what do you need in the future to determine uh, to fulfill your obligation as the director of this business? In my mind, that's
Okay.
kind of the four things that a director should bring to a quarterly update call with shareholders. Um, what I like to also do is have monthly calls with department heads, which is more than what you would discuss on a weekly basis, right? And this is where you talk about specific things to make sure that we are in a line, because court's only 3 months. So, we have to make sure on a monthly basis or even bi-weekly that we are on point with what we promised to ownership. Now, let's say something happens, then you have to use your honestly, just you have to use your common sense and say, okay, this is a threat to what we want to achieve as an organization. This could be a competitor has developed a new product which significantly is going to make it's going to mean that we're going to lose X number of deals over the next 9 to 12 months, right? Let's take that as an example. The first thing you've got to determine is what is the total of revenue available based on what this product offering can do. How much are we going to lose based on the number of deals that we've set in the past? So, for example, let's say you lose 10 deals a month, and of those 10 deals, 5 deals you lose because of this new product you don't have, right? And the competitor does. The next question I would ask is, if we had that product, would we have won, right? And let's say you would have won 80% of those. That means you would have won 4 deals. Let's say your average deal is 100K. So you've lost 400K per quarter, which is 1.6 million. So uh, I would then ask, how long would it take to develop this product, and how much is it going to cost me? And that's your ROI, really. ROI is how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost me to make it, and how much am I going to bet, how much am I going to make, and how long am I going to get my money back, right? And that is the business plan that you put towards ownership. And my fourth point, which was any threats to future profit. Well, this is our competitor has this thing. You put it forward, and then they either invest or they don't, right? Or you give up your own shares, whatever it might be. So that's how you run that. Your job is, you have a fiduciary responsibility to execute the plan of ownership, but again, and execute the strategy in a lawful way. And part of that is identifying threats and communicating that effectively. And you can work on the fly. Like, plans change. There's nothing wrong with that. Most organizations that are successful started off with something completely different, because they pivot, because they see an opportunity or a market that they didn't see, or a threat which made them do something else. It happens all the time. So, but yeah.
Well, let me ask you this real quick. I had another question, but then that just prompted another question. So let me just ask you this. I'm gonna lose my own, I'm gonna lose my own questions in a minute. But like, how, when you say pivot all the time, that example that you just gave me, right? When you were operating, and I love it. It was so vivid. You're operating, let's just say, within that quarter
Mm-hmm.
because of a competitive threat that just came up, right? In other words, that pivot is happening in a quarter. Are you saying organizations pivot that often, or they pivot like on a yearly kind of a basis based on what market is doing, or again, does that kind of depend on the landscape and all that other stuff?
Yeah, it's more the latter. Like, when you're going to, it depends on how big the pivot is as well, right? Like, but I would say more the latter. Like, you could go into an organization and say, from now on, we're not going to be charging. We're only going to be providing 2 to 4 year contracts. You could do that overnight. We're not going to show
Yep.
price on our website. You could do that overnight. We're going to have a SDR to AE ratio of 1 to 2, not 1 to 1. You could do these things quite
Mm-hmm.
quickly, right? But then there are other pivots
Mm-hmm.
which are bigger, such as um, what's our addressable market? We thought it was cybersecurity and then retail and then this, but actually it's FMCG, transport, and this, right? Or we thought we were SMB, but actually this product can work in enterprise and we can charge 4x. Or
Mm-hmm.
we thought that North America was our biggest market, but based on the product we provide, actually it fits better into the UK, the DACH region, Southern Europe, and the Nordics for whatever reason, right? These are um, and I've seen all of those examples, by the way, right? So these are the things
Mm-hmm.
that you need to determine. And what I like is when you have an exec team that have, really, really bright people that bring analyses who are, you want to work with people who are smarter than you. I don't have all the answers, and they can bring tangible value statements. And look, if it doesn't work, that's fine. You shouldn't be afraid of missing. You should be afraid of not shooting, right?
Right.
Um, so that's what I would say to that. Yeah.
There's a lot, obviously, that's put on the shoulders of a CEO as we're having this conversation. All that stuff is is sort of highlighted, if you will. How, as a CEO, have you managed your time? And if there was a pie chart, if we were to draw a pie chart of it,
Yeah.
a proverbial
You
pie
want to see
chart,
this
what would
pie
it
chart? Yeah.
what would it look like? You know what I mean?
Okay.
In terms of
Yeah. Okay. So I was never really I was never really a morning person, but
mm,
I'm an early riser. So I my the time that I wake up has ranged from like 5 a.m. to 4 a.m. And there's varying reasons for that. A lot of the time it's to do with the
mm,
time zones that I work with. So sometimes I can work with West Coast, which is like -8, New York
mm,
-5, or Midwest
mm,
-6, right through to, Europe +1, +2, right through to Eastern Europe
exposure.
+3, right through to India +5.5 or 4.5, depending on the time of the year,
Mm,
right through to China, which is like +8, right? So, so you need to rise early, and I'm big into nutrition and healthy lifestyle and fitness. And so especially working from home, you sitting at your screen all day. We're not designed to just sit down all day in front of the screen, right? So you have to take time
mm,
to exercise and things like that. So my day is made up of exercising. I love to cook. I love to eat healthy food and cook my own food, and I actually probably get more pleasure in the cooking than the eating, just because it's a de-stressor for me. I spend time
mm,
writing. I like to read nonfiction. Um,
mm.
so those are a few things. I like to play football. You guys call it soccer on the weekends, and I do a lot of thinking as well. Like, I'm one of these people who spend a lot of time thinking, which can be good and bad, depending on the
Mm.
time of the day. Not very good at bedtime, but I'm a thinker, and I even try to form. That's how I learn as well. Like, I like to think things through. I like to speak them into existence, and I like to actually do in order for it to come to fruition, which is kind of the vision, planning, execution piece. Which is it's funny now that I'm thinking about it, because it's kind of what you do as a CEO. You have a vision for the
Mm,
business, which is in alignment with ownership, and most people have
mm,
visions of their own. But the difference between that and actually putting a plan in place is a fraction of the population, right? And then another fraction of the population will then take the plan and actually do something about it. And then another fraction of the population will do something about it and stick with it. And now you're left with like 2-3% of people, right? So whether it's your hobbies, or whether it's your business, or whatever it is, um, yeah, I kind of spend a lot of time kind of thinking, and that's how I kind of learn and spend my time. So yeah.
What are you writing? You mentioned you write. What are you writing?
I come from a mu- so my, I come from a family of musicians. So I used to be a musician when I was younger.
Oh,
So that was cool. So I write songs just to kind of get the creative. It allows my creative side to kind of come to the top, because I think most of us have a creative side that gets drilled and
mm,
squeezed out of us. Uh, as we grow older, and that's maybe another conversation. And I think it's important for people to understand that artistry is actually um, can be a factor of your own kind of intelligence and how you can figure things out. It allows your brain to stay active, so then it allows your brain to figure out other things, if that makes sense. So I like to write
yeah,
when I have a moment. I do it a lot. Most of the time I write is actually if I'm flying somewhere. That's usually when I actually tend to write things down, because I don't know why, but for some reason writing and being on a plane kind of go really well for me. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I like to write as well.
It's interesting what you said about vision, planning, execution, and
Hmm.
then the one thing, because I always talk about that too as well. It's like vision, strategy, and execution, right?
Hmm.
Vision's the easy part, right? The strategy,
Yeah,
okay, that's a
everyone's
little
got a
bit
business
harder.
idea. Yeah.
Exactly. Everybody's got vision. Strategy is a little bit harder. The execution is harder than the strategy because you're like strategy.
Hmm.
Okay, this is the direction we're going to go in. This is
Hmm.
the plan. All the other stuff. And then the execution. But the thing that you brought up that I didn't necessarily appreciate, which is consistency, right? To
Yeah.
continue to do it, right? And then another way of saying it is discipline. So let me just ask you this, right?
Yeah.
Within all this that we've been talking about, getting up, frankly, at 4 o'clock in the morning, cooking your own meals because you know it's healthy for you, and obviously it's a distressor for you as well. But
Hmm.
how do you hold yourself accountable? Like, how do you stay disciplined um, in the to execute on everything that needs to be done?
So it's a good question, and it's kind of the million-dollar question, isn't it? I don't like the word
Mm.
motivation, but I guess I think what I've realized in life is that having a purpose is so key. And I think, when if you ask someone what you want out of life, and they say I want to be happy, I I tend to get a bit like, ooh, because happiness, I think, is a byproduct of having a purpose, right? And that purpose can be
Mm.
anything. It could be um, getting into a certain level of fitness to climb Mount Everest. It could be running a marathon. It could be building a business to a certain stage. It could be buying a house. It could be finding a partner that you want to marry. It could be having a family and having kids. It could be buying a certain car. It could be going to this certain location. It could be traveling. Um, it could be trying to sell your business. It doesn't matter, right? And I think the happiest people that I know are the ones that are too busy to ask themselves if they're happy or not, right? They're just getting on with it. They don't sit down and think about it. Now, I'm not saying every person that works their backside off is happy. I'm not saying that. But I think if you are either doing what you have to do in order to get to do what you want to do, or you are doing what you want to do and are happy in the current state you're in, then I think you're winning. I think you are in a position where you are fulfilling your purpose and you're happy without having to think about it, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess the context there is it's easier to stay disciplined when you do have that purpose and when you are happy doing the thing that you are doing. I remember like Kobe Bryant, for example, one of the folks that I idolize is that he fell in love with the work. Right. In other
Yeah.
words, it was the work that he really enjoyed, and of course, if you enjoy the work when nobody else is around, then
Yeah.
you become Kobe Bryant. You become Michael Jordan. Right.
Absolutely,
For
because the
sure.
work is the work is 99% of the achievement. Like
That's
you
right.
can't like when people say it was a good film but the ending was bad. It's like, okay, but if and I know it's not the best analogy, but in any journey, 99% in any thing you want to achieve, 99% of it is the journey itself. So if you're not
Yeah.
happy with the journey piece, then you're going to be miserable 99% of the time. Like if you only live for the weekend, then you're going to be upset, you know, something like 72% of the time, right? Yeah, I think my maths are right there. Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, 72 point something% of the time, right? So
Yeah.
that's no way to live, is it? So
Right.
I think finding a purpose is important, and how you can do that is to understand, well, what's important to you. Now that could be as arbitrary as I want to buy a house, which is actually no mean feat in 2024, right? It's the most
Yeah, right.
expensive purchase that most people will ever make, and it's the biggest investment that most people will ever make, right? So it could
Mhm.
be, I want to buy that thing that gives me some stability, you know, or it could be family members. Maybe you've got children. It depends on what it is, and as long as you can attach that emotional component, I think organically you will then become motivated to do the things that you want and or need to do in life. So I think when you're young, you probably get a screenshot of a car or something like that, but you see that change over time. Another thing I would say is back to kind of the vision, strategy, execution piece. You could be someone that had a vision 10, 20 years ago. You hear about it all the time. Someone has a vision, and then like 5, 10, 20 years later, they're in their house, they go into the loft, and they dust off this thing, and it's like a vision board that they created 20 years ago. And they read it, and it's like, oh, wow, like 90% of what's on this board is my life today, which means that vision sat in the back of their subconscious, but it was still in their conscious. They just forgot about it, but they had a strategy and they put things in place for that thing to be executed. Now, some people call that law of attraction, but you know that doesn't mean I want a car and then it's going to just arrive suddenly in my front drive. But what it means is like you're noticing things and you're speaking to people and you're seeing, oh, actually, that aligns with that thing, and so on and so forth. And I think that works really well. So
As you're saying that, I'm looking to my left over here at my vision board that I
yeah.
need to update. It was 2020 when I did it. But what's interesting is that at the beginning of this year, which was a hard year, right? 2012. Now we're in 2024, so I should say 2023. It was a hard year
Yeah.
because my focus is working with early to late stage tech companies between $5 and $50 million. Let's just say when they struggled, I struggled, right? And
Mm.
so I remember looking at that vision board and saying, well, part of the problem is that all that stuff is on the vision board. I've pretty much accomplished, in 21, 22, and I need
Wow.
to upgrade that. Yeah, so either my vision needs to be bigger, right, or I just need to adjust the vision. I think part of that was, I think both of those things were true. So it's interesting. The other thing too that you mentioned in terms of the movie is, the vision the visual, I guess, that I put there is, the company exit, right? Or
Mm.
the wonderful strategic acquisition that was 10x or the IPO, whatever. That's the tip of the iceberg, right? And everything else leading up to it is what we've been talking about anyhow, right? In terms of
Mm.
and again, I talked to you about this before we record officially last week when we talked. Like, I love the detail. That stuff I geek out over.
Absolutely.
Which, by the way, we're gonna take another dive here in a second. But
Sure.
but
Absolutely.
like, I love that stuff. Is sort of looking at, like, experimenting with looking at the data and trying to figure out which decision to make and when to make it, and who should make it, and who loses and who wins, and or
Hmm.
maybe both of us win. And just there's so many different things that go into that.
Hmm.
And I just love it all, and I think it's really important, for sure. So I appreciate you going there with me. But let me go back into the weeds here for a moment, because this is the
Okay.
other thing too that people talk about, right? Which is, especially now, as I just mentioned, tough year 2023
Hmm.
is growth and profitability, right? And
Hmm.
it's like, growth on one shoulder and
Yeah.
profitability on the other shoulder, right? The devil and angel, so to speak, right? But they can coexist
Hmm.
to a certain extent. And the question I have for you broadly is how can they coexist? How can one make them coexist? A CEO with your experience make them coexist? Explain that to me.
Absolutely. So first of all, growth and profitability. It depends on the it depends on the modus operandi of the investor or ownership, right? So let's just say you are a VC and you're in growth mode from an acquisition or an entity that you've invested heavily in. Okay, you might say, I want to exit between 1 and 10 years time. Um, you're looking at metrics that determine valuation. So that could be, typically, there's kind of, I would say, 6 to 7 main key components that determine the valuation of an organization. That would be, what's your run rate, previous and future forecasted. What's your retention rate, both GRR and NRR? So GRR is basically the retention rate of existing revenue, not including new business or expansion. And NRR is any plus or minus churn, plus additional sales from the base. You've got globalization, so things like, you know, we're based in North America, but how do we expand to Europe or APAC or, you know, the Middle East or Africa? I've spent most of my career helping US SaaS companies develop go-to-market strategies in Europe, for example. Other things such as how much do we have to invest to get this ROI from an investment standpoint? What's the internal rate of return? How easy is it to scale your business, right? Can we enter new markets? Can we enter? Can we? Is there high barriers to entry? Are competitors going to kill us? Is our product sticky, right? Are these processes repeatable with relative ease? Things like that. I kind of touched on barriers to entry, but touches on risk. How is your product going to be killed by something else in the near future? And if so, what does that look like? So these are all kind of value drivers, and your focus may be on, hey, we want to grow the valuation of this organization and exit in 3 years. I've worked for companies that were operating at a loss when they did that. So there was no, like, the net margin increased, but it was still at a loss, still at a deficit, right? But that's okay because a new VC can buy out the debt, and that's another conversation, right? So there's like growth, and then you've got like profit focus, and that's when organizations want real EBITDA. They want like real traditional profit, which is determined from subtracting your expenses from your revenue and getting a bottom line figure, and then on a quarterly basis, dividends going out to shareholders. Right, it's the traditional model that most people understand business to be,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's that focus as well, and they both work. It just depends on what your just depends on what you want those outcomes to be, and you can also see organizations that benefit from having both as well. So that's kind of the main
Mm-hmm.
differences that I see.
And they can both exist, but I think from what I understand it, it's like, let's say for instance, if you wanted to, I don't know, double growth, let's just say year
Hmm.
over year, or triple growth year over year,
Hmm. Hmm.
you can do that. Let's just say if you have the money and the means and all that stuff. But the
Hmm.
reality is that you're not going to, you can't expect 15% profit doing that, right? Like, in other words, that's unlikely to happen in a lot of, especially the companies that we're talking about, when early the growth stage companies, right? Is that fair to say, or maybe I'm just naive?
There, yes and no. So there is a correlation between the rate of growth versus real profit.
Okay.
It's not a rule, but there's a correlation. So again, let's talk about houses. Houses is a perfect example of this because, you know, it's the same. It's the same model. You buy a house for one of two
Mm-hmm.
reasons, right? Or one of three reasons. You either buy it to live in it, you buy it to flip it, and then get gains, which we call like capital gains in the UK, or you buy it to rent it out, which is cash flow, which in the business world is dividends. It's the same thing. So
Yeah.
organizations do exactly the same thing. They create companies, right, and keep the company. They buy or invest in a company and then flip it. They keep it for a certain period of time, grow it, irrespective of what the cash flow is. Not irrespective, but you get my point. And then,
Yep.
or they buy it, and then it works well from a dividend standpoint, right? Um, there are instances whereby um, certain investors will focus on certain products or industries that have high customer stickiness. Two which come to mind are sports and fashion. So, sports and fashion have done a really good job of tapping into the emotional state of a consumer. So, in let's say you're a I don't know, you're a sports, you support a basketball team, right? And you're a diehard fan of this basketball team. Even if the team is not performing well, you still may buy a season ticket. You still may buy
Mm-hmm.
tickets to go to because my father was a fan and his father was a fan and so forth. So if you're the owner of that team, again, depending on what your goals are, they will still garner revenue and profit from a customer base which is price inelasticity. So, irrespective of how good a product is or how expensive it is, demand still occurs. So that's what we just call that price
Mm-hmm.
inelastic. Fashion's the same.
Right.
Fashion brands, high end fashion, will spend copious amounts of money on advertising and brand manipulation to evoke a feeling from a customer so that they have the idea that this product is more superior than something else, even though they're made from the same place and it's the same quality.
Mm,
Now, you could argue that they have
hmm.
higher expenses, but the revenue significantly outweighs it, hence how they
Mm.
can profit from the scenario. So again, it's about tapping into the emotional state of a buyer. That's one way, and then another way is just creating product stickiness. But again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve as an organization.
Yeah, and also going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of lifetime value and customer acquisition cost, just as a
Hmm.
one data point, is that whatever you're trying to achieve, whether it's growth or profitability, you need to look at the data that you have and say, okay, well, if profitability is what we're looking for, then we're gonna be over here on the CAC side, likely to try to, well, maybe not, I guess, right? Because again, it all depends. but but I guess simple and easy, you could say, okay, we're gonna cut expenses here. Perhaps maybe people we're gonna inject some AI here, so we don't need, to your point, three BDRs or SDRs. We're going to need only one SDR, and we'll use Copilot or some other thing to sort
Hmm.
of help us with that, right? And so depending on the goal of the business or the goal of the ownership entity,
Hmm.
that's how decisions are going to be made, and success is going to be derived one way or the other, right?
Yeah, it froze for about 10 seconds there, but I think I got the gist of what you're saying. Ultimately,
Yeah.
you know, the CEO takes guidance from the team, and the team bring ideas which we look at and we evaluate, and we just say, okay, what's the desired outcome? What does the revenue look like? What does the cost look like? How long does it take to implement that? And how much is it going to improve efficiency? And you make calculated risks based off of other companies who provide services to the market. This is the beauty of the market. You've
Mm.
got the winner and the loser is the winner is the organization that produces more than it consumes. That's all it is. That's all it is.
Mm.
So how do you
Mm.
create, and
Interesting.
this taps into value, right? All you have to do is create value. That's it. Just provide something. It doesn't have to be new, because let's be honest, nothing's new under the sun. Everything's just a variation of what exists already, right? What's the
Right.
first social media site? I don't know, like MySpace or something, right? Or
Right.
MSN Messenger. Yeah. Some people are like, what the hell is
That's right.
that?
Yeah. Right. Right.
So yeah. So everything is a calculated risk,
Yeah.
but you need to buy other people's products to create your own product. That's it. That's it.
Mm.
So it's a really interesting game when you analyze it in that way. So
I love how you put that so succinctly. The winner is the entity that produces more than it consumes.
that's it.
Bit of advice that I gave. Yeah, I gave my kids that advice several years ago, and they're sitting there consuming YouTube, and I said, listen, here's the deal.
Yeah.
I remember actually they had just started going to school from home because it was in the pandemic, and this is when it was all new and there was no even structure at home. Never mind like asynchronous. There just was no
Hmm.
synchronicity at all.
Hmm.
And so I took a couple of hours one day and brought down this big projector screen and showed them basically like how the YouTubers that they were watching on YouTube actually were making money, right? And this time my
Just
kids were like 6 and 4 or something like that. And I said, listen, here's the deal. they
Look,
were,
you
they were,
like, I'm
they were
gonna play with my toys. Like,
exactly. And I said to them, I go, listen, I go, here's the deal. I'm like, they're making money because you're
yeah,
consuming, right? I
yeah,
go, but
yeah,
if you start producing, right, your own videos,
yeah.
right, then now all of a sudden you can play your entire lives if you want. You want to play with these toys, you want to play with these Incredible Hulks, you can collect as many Incredible Hulks as
Mm,
possible, or as many. My son at the
mm.
time, Batman, I think he had like 56. I go you can do this forever as long as you figure out a way to monetize it. And I go, and this is
Yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
is how you do it. You can either do the producer or you can be the consumer. So there you
That's it.
go.
We've,
Yeah,
and I'm going to get this order wrong. I know I am, but I'll say it anyway. So I'm sure some
yeah,
historian will be like correcting me. But we had like the Ice Age, and then the Bronze Age, and then the Stone Age, and then the
yeah.
Industrial Revolution. And then we had, I'm sure we had something, and then we had the
Yeah.
Digital Age, and then we
Mm-hmm.
had the Social Media Age, and now for me,
Mm-hmm.
we had the Information Age,
That's
and
right.
now I think we're in the Attention Age. That's
Yes.
social,
Yes.
Instagram. Like I see, we all see people that just sit on it, they just scrolling through Instagram all day, and it's
Hmm.
fascinating to watch it. It's fascinating to watch it, and they don't realize that their eyeballs is almost like a payment to the people who are making the
Hmm.
content on said social media sites, for example. So I think we're in an attention age, which is really interesting. But yeah, you know, are you you either a producer or a consumer in any moment? When I was in my 20s,
Hmm.
when I got my first big commission check, the first thing I wanted was a really nice German car, and I bought one. And then I got another
Hmm.
one, and then I got another one, and then I was like, do you know what? This is in alignment with what I want to achieve from a wealth
Hmm.
standpoint. And so now I don't even have a car, and people think I'm crazy, but
Wow.
I don't have a car.
Hmm.
I get trains and buses, because it's not part of
Hmm.
the big picture, at least now. And
Yeah.
it's London. It's very easy to get around. There are other things that I'm focusing on than maybe perceived liabilities. So yeah,
Yeah. Sounds like your job as a CEO too, uh, for sure.
yeah.
Let's get into, you ready for the rapid fire five? I'll ask you the five questions, give me five answers, and then I'll give you an opportunity to answer a question that my last guest asked me, and then you can
Okay.
ask me whatever question you want me to ask the next guest. Okay,
Sure.
fabulous. Here we go. Number one, what motivates you?
Um, I think I touched on this earlier. Just the desire to have a purpose. I think that the desire to have a purpose then allows you to be happy without having to think about being happy. That then allows me to
Hmm.
benefit myself, my family, my friends, my community, and people that's less fortunate than myself.
Name a big goal you have right now and when you would like to accomplish it.
Yeah, so this one's actually quite tangible. So quick backstory: 2020 December, went to Barbados, needed some time away. Was staying in an Airbnb. Everything was automated. Never spoke to the owner. There was an issue with the flights that weren't in line with the accommodation dates. Had to speak to the manager.
Hmm.
Could Spoke to the manager, not the owner. That then gave me an idea to do the same thing. I started that process in January 2021, and today I'm building apartments that can house 9, 18, 27, 54 people. That will be complete by September 2025. So yeah, it's really exciting. It's really really weird because I get updates every 4 weeks from the project manager, and you can see the original vision. Getting back to the vision strategy piece, I had a vision
That's
of
right.
this building, and I put a plan in place on a sheet which shows specifically week one, week two, week three, how much it's going to cost, how long it takes, what's going to happen, what's the process. And now to see it come to fruition is really weird because now I'm seeing a real building being
Hmm.
built. And it's like, wow, that's what I'm
Yeah.
doing. And it's 100% cash, there's no loans. So
Wow.
it's really awesome to see. So yeah, I'm working on that at the moment.
That must be so satisfying
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, and they're
What's your
very
most
sorry, and they're most like they're on time as well. They're not like, oh, this part's going to take 4 weeks, but actually takes six, 7, or 8. It's like, no, 4 weeks, and I see the proof. It's really cool. So,
That is amazing. That is amazing. What's your most preferred way to learn new information and to stay sharp?
so I think if you ask a psychologist, they'll probably say like there's like 15, 16 different ways, but for me, I kind of condense it into four: thinking,
Hmm.
speaking, writing, and doing. I like to do. It's the way that I learn the best. Um,
Mm.
there are people that are very good at reading through material and can read through book. That's why I prefer nonfiction to fiction. Obviously, I can read, but
Yeah.
there are people I know who are very good at reading, like, and just can go through material and learn that way. I prefer to
Mm.
learn via speaking it into existence and doing. It's one of the main reasons why I never became a lawyer, because I just found that it was mostly reading. I'm great at arguing
Mm.
points. I just to learn the points is the hard bit. So yeah, for me it's doing and then speaking and then thinking and then probably writing at the bottom. Sorry, reading at the bottom.
I literally I had that text exchange with my best friend in the world. I think last week when
Okay.
we were talking about something, and I told him, I would have been a lawyer if I didn't have to read as much.
It's good to read. And it's like some guys are great at it. Like you hear those guys who can read a book a day, and I'm just like, okay,
Right.
still on chapter one
Yeah.
of
Right.
Intelligent Investor. So,
Right. Yeah. Right.
but yeah,
That's right.
so
For sure. For sure. All right, here's an interesting one that I injected probably about, I don't know, 4 or 5 episodes in because somebody asked it for one of my guests. So I decided to make it a regular part of
sure.
the show, which is, who's your favorite character of all time? Could be TV, could be movie, could be the neighbor down the street. But who would you say your favorite
Oh,
character is of
I'm
all
gonna be
time?
very boring and say my mum. Can I say my mum?
Yeah, if that for sure.
Yeah, she's hilarious. She's down to earth. She's smart. She's astute. Good judge of character. She's laid back, but she's also cutthroat if you cross her. So she gives you grace. She gives you grace, but then play yourself. And that's it. Um,
I
very strong lady.
love it.
Very, like I said, very reasonable. The life and soul of the party. Very serving as well. She offers value to other people all of the time. It feels like a cop out, but yeah, I'd say my mother. She's pretty cool. So
I love that as an answer, for sure, because it doesn't have to be someone who's famous or known,
mm.
but like I said, anybody in your life. So that's fantastic. Makes me actually think about rethinking my favorite character.
Well, she,
What's your
like
favorite?
when she was like really young, she's from Ghana, and what she did was she would create her own sweets. Like she was literally like 11 years old, created her own sweets, took them to school, and sold them to her school friends. Then she came to the UK like 17, 18, and then went to Paris School of Fashion, created a clothing line, then had one of the first West African restaurants in North London in the late
Hmm.
80s. Ran that, set up businesses. Um, yeah, like it's set up, it's now as a hotel in Ghana, things like that. So it's very impressive, all while remaining relatively humble. So it's really cool to see. And she's like 75.
Wow, how much? 75. That
Well,
is amazing.
76 now, yeah. So
76. That is amazing. Yeah, it sounds like you come from great pedigree for sure. What's your favorite thing to do when you aren't working?
I think I touched on these earlier. I like to cook. I like to write. I love to go to the gym. Go maybe 4 or 5 times a day. I play football every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. No exceptions. Um, if I do read, it's more kind of psychology based. So I like people like Carl Jung. I've read. I haven't read his whole all of his books, but people like Nietzsche. There's a few books I'm reading now. Think Fast and Slow, Factfulness, more business led books as well. Amp It Up by Frank Slootman. That's pretty cool. I like that because
Hmm.
it's like how I think. It's not high level. It's specific. This is exactly what I did, and this is how I allowed the business to exit. I think it's like a
Hmm.
2 or 3 time successful exits in technology. Um,
What was the name of the book by Frank Slootman?
so it's called
What was the name?
Amp It Up. AMP.
Amp It's Up. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. There's a few. The Advantage, Patrick Lencioni. That's pretty cool. The Leadership Gap as well. That's pretty cool as well. What You Think Is Who You Are by I'm gonna say Ben Horowitz. It's pretty cool as
Okay.
well.
Yep.
Again, it's like,
Hmm.
yeah.
Fantastic. I love it. You said, let me just clarify something. I heard you say you go to the gym 4 to 5 times a day or
A
4 to 5 times a week.
week. Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Not
Good day.
not a
I'm
lot.
like, no wonder why I wake up at 4 a.m.
Yeah, yeah. If I did say day, I meant a week. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
Um,
Okay. You ready for the bonus question? Bonus
yeah. Go
question is
on.
this. This is interesting, actually.
Yeah.
You might have to give it a couple of seconds because I did when I was asked of me.
Okay.
Tell me something about yourself that is interesting that most people don't know about you. Interesting about yourself that most people don't know about you.
Played the violin when I was 10. Um,
Violin.
yeah, it's pretty boring. I stopped when I went to secondary. Went to
Well,
an all-boys school. Go on, sorry.
maybe not for most of us who didn't know you when you were 10 or know you were
Yeah.
little. So let me
Uh,
just ask you this a follow-up question to that then.
hmm.
Was it something that you wanted to actively pursue? Was it something that your parents suggested that you do? What was the context there?
Initially, I wanted to pursue it because I was always musically inclined, um,
Hmm.
and it seemed quite difficult, and that actually made me want to do it. And then, so I started doing that maybe 8 years old, 7, 8 years old. I
Hmm.
did that for like 3 years.
Hmm.
And then, like, I remember the day I stopped. I went to an all boys school in secondary school, and I just thought, I'm not gonna play the violin. So I completely bottled it. I completely shut it down. So yeah, that's one thing. But yeah, that was a long time ago. So yeah,
Is that the last time you played, or did you play? Have you played
that was the last time I
dabbled
played.
since? And
Yeah,
wow,
I was
amazing.
in music class first year in what we call secondary school. So you're like 11 at this point. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing
Yep,
this. This is not good with me with my friends.
done. I better start playing soccer. Yeah.
Yeah,
Better stop playing football. Yeah, I
yeah,
hear
yeah,
you. I
exactly.
hear
Yeah,
you. Last element here, which is what would you like for me to ask my next guest?
yeah. So we were talking about vision, strategy, execution, right? And they're all as important as each
Hmm.
other because without one, the whole thing is a house of cards. But in your
Hmm.
opinion, what's more important, the vision or the execution, and why? And you're not allowed to say
What's
both.
I love it. What's more important, vision or the execution?
Yeah. And, I say that understanding fully well that you can't execute anything without a vision, and a vision is
Hmm.
useless unless you execute. I'm fully aware of that. But
Yes.
what would you say is more important out of the two? And you can't say both.
Yep. I love it. I love it. In the interest of time, I will not ask you that question. I reserved I reserved the right to ask you later at
Yeah, yeah,
later
yeah.
at a later point. But we are a little over an hour for this recording, and so I envision people either ending their long walks with their dogs, or maybe ending a commute, or the second part of their commute. So we will end the episode with one other question for you, which is how can folks say thank you, reach out to you to perhaps ask a question that I didn't ask, maybe that question that you just asked. What's the best way for people to reach you and connect?
Yeah, so you can reach me on LinkedIn. My name's quite unique. Meshach Amuah-Fuster, Meshach Amuah-Fuster. I'm on Twitter as well, MLA Fuster. Not on that much, but sometimes. So those are kind of the main two channels you can reach me on.
And I will make sure that the correct spelling, of course, Meshach's name is in the show notes and links to his socials as well.
Sure.
Meshach, thank you for joining me on the Goats of Growth.
Thanks for having me, Jay. Really enjoyed it. Really appreciated it.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend, tell a colleague, and all that wonderful stuff. Until next time, I will see you. Goodbye.